It seems that my video this morning, there's one or two little bits to add, that already we've had another 2 or 3 missile strikes, NATO missile strikes, across into the Russian Federation. And the Americans are now talking out loud, as it were, about boots on the ground in the Ukraine. Boots on the ground. Went well in Vietnam, didn't it? And Iraq and Afghanistan, but there we are. What can you do with the industrial military complex? But the question you've got to ask yourself and your family, do you want World War III for the Ukraine? Do you think it's worth it? I don't. Watch the clip and make up your own mind. Well, greetings to you. I return, sadly, again after a layoff of nearly a year, to the conflict between the Russian Federation and NATO. I did write in 2016 for Going Postal magazine that no good would come of our involvement with the Ukraine. It's corrupt. It's a NATO Washington neocon puppet. And if you wrestle with a chimney sweep, you're going to get soot all over you. And that's exactly what's happened. But I've avoided it and I've left it because there isn't much point. Although I have on my website explained the Russian point of view. But now the Russian point of view has been reinforced in spades. The Russians feel the same way as in the 1960s, which I remember because I'm an old geezer now. The Americans felt that they couldn't have the Soviet Union's missiles in Cuba. It was just too close and it was in their backyard. And the story now is history. We know that the Soviets gave way and removed their missiles. It's not quite as simple as that, incidentally, but broadly speaking, that'll do for now. Now, the Russian Federation feel the same way about having NATO in their backyard. They have 1,000 kilometers of border with Ukraine. And they made it extremely clear to Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and everybody else who wanted to listen, to say, we will not accept hostile soldiers or missiles or anything else on this border. It's too close. It's only 800 miles from Moscow and we're just not going to do it. So be warned. And Liz Truss, you remember Liz Truss? She was the Foreign Secretary. She went over to talk to Putin just over 3 years ago and came back. And Putin said then, and you can find the quote, it's easy enough to find, she just wasn't listening. She just wasn't listening. And NATO and the West have not been listening ever since. Now, I was in favour of the peace plan that came about in March, April 2022. I thought this is as good as it's going to get. This is a get-out clause for everyone. It's going to save a lot of lives. The Ukrainians signed it. The Russian Federation signed it. It was virtually done and dusted in April 2022 when Boris Johnson went out and scuppered it. He said, don't worry, leave it. No, we're going to give you everything you need to beat the Russians by proxy. And this is what happened all those months ago and lives ago. Since that time, there have been estimated some in the region of 300,000 more young Ukrainian dead. Probably another 25,000 Russian young men dead. When the peace deal was on the table. I don't know how Boris Johnson sleeps at night. Probably cuddles up to a check he got from the neocons in Washington. I don't know what the game is, why he would have stopped that. It's madness, but it's continuing. Now, the reason I've come back to this, because it's not now all unfolding just as I said it would, with the Russians creeping forward and forward and forward, and they will take over Odessa and all the cities which are basically Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian. That is what they're going to do. They don't want the Western Ukraine. They don't want to govern the Western Ukraine because who would want to? It's a cesspit. It's a shithole. So this is the situation that we're dealing with. Now, Cameron, who's I can only assume is somehow mentally retarded, has suggested, along with Washington, that it's okay for British and American-made missiles guided by British and American technology in the Ukraine to hit targets inside Russia. and it appears they've just hit a target inside, which is an integral part of the anti-nuclear system of the West defending the Russian Federation. This is a major piece of escalation and criminal insanity. Now, my subscribers know that I'm a published military historian with some pertinent amount of expertise in the Great War, and it reminds me now of July 1914, when Serbia, who'd nobody really had much heard of, and Bosnia and the Balkans, and nobody was much interested in, certainly in the United Kingdom or the British Empire in those days, suddenly there was an assassination, as we all know, by Gabriel Princip of the Archduke. And then we find that it's escalated when the Austrian Empire line up against Serbia, who they blame, and want to punish. Then the Russian Empire then line up behind Serbia, and Germany lines up behind the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I've said all this before, but I'm saying it again because it's not drilling through. And then we have a system where the United Kingdom, the British Empire, was sucked into a war which was nothing whatsoever to do with them. It's nothing to do with us, what's going on at the moment in the Ukraine. The Russian Federation and the Ukraine are fighting a war, and it's very sad, it's very wasteful, it's very unnecessary, but it's nothing to do with us. And it is quite obvious that the move that NATO have just made will bring about some kind of reprisal or retaliation from the Russian Federation. It's bound to happen. And the Russian Federation and Putin and the Kremlin said this will happen. It's a step too far. Now, here's the question. Where will the retaliation come? Now, there will be those in the Kremlin who are suggesting, the hardliners, of which Putin is not one, incidentally. Don't believe your Daily Express or even your Sunday Telegraph, which is run by CIA press releases and MI6 press releases and the gung-ho military-industrial congressional complex. And I've made these points before. It's all about money. The only people who win out of a war are bankers, money, and arms manufacturers. So those of you who glue yourselves to the Daily Express, try and broaden your horizons and think about what the global situation is and how dangerous it can be. Now, there will be those in the Kremlin who will say this is instigated by Lord Cameron, who went out on a limb to say quite categorically that it was perfectly okay for British missiles guided by British personnel and British targeting systems to strike within the Russian borders. Now, he could be under pressure to say, well, therefore, why don't we put a hypersonic missile and drop it on Chipping Camden, which is very close to where Cameron lives, to teach him a lesson? And perhaps it might, or perhaps it might not. I don't know, because I think the man is a cretin. Now, I was brought up in the 60s, 50s and 60s. I'm a baby boomer. One thing that frightened us all, my generation in those days, was nuclear war. Mutual assured destruction. We were frightened of that, and we were right to be frightened of that. And on the campuses everywhere in Great Britain and America was ban the bomb. I didn't go along with it because I thought it was silly. But the point is, mutual assured destruction only works if both sides have got a fear of nuclear war and the capacity to carry out nuclear war, which the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States and NATO have. And now they've extended that with nuclear warheads, I think, to Denmark and Germany. This is escalating much in the same way as it did in 2014, and historians still today, and I'm one of them, are scratching their heads and wondering, how the hell did we get into a war which cost 3 million British Empire casualties in a war which was nothing whatsoever to do with us, and we're going down the same route again because we've learnt nothing from history. Nothing from history. And largely, I suspect, because our modern politicians never pick up a history book. Because they're morons. Okay, they went to Oxford and they speak with a posh accent and all the rest of it, but they're cretins. They're cretins. So it's getting more and more dangerous. I don't quite know what's going to come of this, but I can assure you no good will come of it. And we are teetering on World War III, which of course is a wonderful get-out clause for the disastrous Western economies brought about by the very politicians who want to go to war. Very often a war is your get-out clause. But do you want a war with the Russian Federation? Is that what you want? Do you think war is a good thing? Have you any idea how bad war is? How many people die and people are maimed? And if you, like me, have visited places like East Grinter to see the war wounded and war dead, my father was a fighter pilot and he was badly injured in the war, as was my grandfather on the Messine Ridge in 1917. War is very bad. And we seem to be treating it at the moment like some sort of game. You know, one of the little games that teenagers play or kiddies play on a screen, bing, 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 all that kind of thing. It isn't. It isn't. A lot of people die. A lot of people get maimed. We have to step back and broker a peace. It means we have to start talking. We have to start talking to the Russian Federation, NATO, before it's too late. Before it's too late. So I implore you, make your feelings known to the press who are trying to portray the Russian Federation and Putin as being the embodiment of evil, and it was an unprovoked attack on the Ukraine, an unprovoked invasion of the Ukraine. It wasn't. It wasn't. Do your homework. Everybody, please do your homework. And if you need information, visit my website, and I tell you all about it. So let's take a step back before it's too late. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.